The last thing Travis Cole expected on a rainy Tuesday morning was to find a barefoot woman in a soaked designer coat standing on his front porch clutching a duffel bag like it held her whole life. "Are you hurt?" he asked, blinking through the mist as he stepped out onto the creaky wooden porch of his small rental house just outside Nashville. Behind him, his 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, peeked from the cracked doorframe, her tangled curls bouncing. The woman looked up, her green eyes wide and glassy. "I'm not hurt," she said softly. I need somewhere to stay just for a night, please." Travis glanced at the storm behind her, then at the duffel bag. He didn't know her. She was clearly not from around here. Her coat alone cost more than his truck. But something in her voice, something raw and honest, made him nod before his brain caught up. "All right," he said, stepping aside. "Come in." Sophie tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, who is she?" "I don't know yet," he said quietly, closing the door behind the woman, "but she looks like she needs help." The woman crouched down to Sophie's level. "Hi, I'm Noelle." Sophie blinked at her. "Are you a princess?" Noelle let out a breath that sounded like it hadn't come easy. "Not exactly." Travis offered her a towel and pointed her toward the bathroom. "You can dry off in there. I'll make some coffee." "No coffee for me," she said quickly. "Water's fine." He noticed the way she said it, like she wasn't used to accepting anything, like someone who'd spent too long learning not to ask. By the time she came back out, wearing an old hoodie Sophie had outgrown and a pair of sweatpants he kept in the guest room, Travis had warmed up leftovers and poured her a glass of water. She sat down at the kitchen table like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. "So," he said as he handed her a plate, "you want to tell me how you ended up on my porch?" Noelle looked down at the table. "It's complicated." He raised a brow. She hesitated, then said, "I left someone I shouldn't have been with in the first place. I didn't know where to go. I saw your porch light, that's all." He didn't push further. He'd seen that look before on himself in the mirror years ago when Sophie's mom left. "You got somewhere to be tomorrow," she shook her head. "Then you can stay tonight. We've got the guest room. It's not much, but..." "It's dry." Noelle looked like she might cry. "Thank you." That night after Sophie went to bed, Travis sat on the sofa while Noelle stood near the window, staring out at the rain. "You sure you're okay?" he asked. "I've never done this before," she admitted. "Just walked away." "Sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do." She turned to him. "You have a good heart, Travis," he smiled, tired. "It's not about having a good heart, it's about Sophie. She deserves to see people do the right thing, even if it's messy." Noelle nodded and whispered, "I wish more people thought that way." What was supposed to be one night turned into 2. Then 3. By the 5th day, Noelle had made pancakes with Sophie, folded laundry with Travis, and helped repaint Sophie's bedroom wall. She didn't say much about her past, but every now and then, she'd pause like she was remembering something she wasn't ready to share. Travis didn't push. He knew people came with scars. He had his own. He was a single dad trying to pick up extra shifts at the auto shop just to make rent. The last thing he needed was to fall for a woman with secrets. But the way Noelle laughed with Sophie, the way she sat on the porch swing at night with a cup of tea, he was starting to feel something he hadn't in years. One morning he came out of his room to find Noelle standing in the kitchen in her coat, the duffel bag back in her hand. "You leaving?" he asked, heart sinking. She looked up, startled. "No, I mean I was going to take a walk. In the rain, I needed air." He studied her. "You sure that's all?" Noelle's lips parted, then closed again. "I'm not who you think I am." He crossed his arms. "I don't think you're anyone. You haven't told me anything." "I know," she said softly. "That's not fair to you." Travis waited. She took a breath. "My full name is Noelle Hartley." He blinked. "Okay. My parents run Hartley Holdings. She looked down. "I'm a billionaire." Travis stared at her like she'd just said she was from another planet. She gave a sad smile. "I left everything, the company, the money, my fiancé. All of it. You were engaged. I was being used. He didn't love me. He loved what marrying me would mean." Travis ran a hand through his hair. "So you walked away from all of it." "I needed to feel real again." He let out a breath, then laughed once dry and surprised. "Well, you came to the right place for real." Noelle stepped closer. "I didn't mean to lie. I didn't want you to treat me differently." "I wouldn't have," he said, looking at her. "But now I don't know what to think." "I'm still me, Travis," she said gently. I'm still the woman who made pancakes with your daughter, who cried on your porch, who meant it when she said thank you. Travis looked at her, really looked. She was scared, vulnerable, and maybe the first person who'd seen him as more than a paycheck and a tired dad. I need some time, he said finally. Noelle nodded. I understand. But as she turned to go, Sophie ran out from her room and threw her arms around Noelle's legs. Don't go, she said, eyes wide. Please. Something cracked in Travis's chest. He didn't say anything. Just walked over, took the duffel bag from Noelle's hand and set it down. You don't have to go, he said. Noelle looked at him, hopeful and unsure. I don't care about your last name, he said, but I do care about how you've made this house feel. Alive again. She blinked, then nodded, tears in her eyes, and just like that she stayed. The next morning, Noelle stood barefoot on the back porch, watching the early sun rise behind a curtain of mist. The field behind the house stretched like a quiet promise, dew shimmering across its surface. Her fingers curled around the chipped mug Travis had handed her, steam rising from the tea she hadn't yet touched. Inside, she could hear Sophie's laughter as she played with her dolls. Travis's voice followed low, steady, patient. Don't forget your shoes this time, he said. We're not going back for them again. It was one time, Sophie said, giggling, and we didn't even go far. Doesn't matter. If we're gonna get groceries, you need shoes, that's the rule. Noelle stepped back in quietly. Travis glanced up from where he knelt beside Sophie at the door, tying her sneakers. You hungry? He asked, standing. I can grab something later, she answered. I thought I might help with the yard while you're out. He looked at her for a moment before nodding. You don't have to, you know. I want to, she said simply. They didn't speak again until he and Sophie were out the door, Sophie waving from the truck window, hair in a messy braid. Noelle waved back, her hand lingering in the air long after they'd disappeared down the road. She spent the next few hours pulling weeds along the fence and trimming branches that had bent too low. Her hands, usually manicured and idle, were scraped and dirt-streaked by noon. It felt strange and right. When Travis returned, he found her dragging a wheelbarrow full of branches toward the shed. You planning on taking over my chores now? He asked. I figured I owed you a few favors. He unloaded the groceries in silence while she washed up. By the time she walked back into the kitchen, he was chopping vegetables, sleeves rolled up, forearms flexing with each movement. You cook? She asked, leaning against the counter. I do what I can, he said. Not fancy, but it feeds us. She watched him for a moment, then said, You ever think about leaving here? He glanced up. You mean the town, the whole thing, the shop, the house, starting over somewhere new? He shook his head. Not really. Sophie's got school and I've got a business that just barely keeps the lights on. Can't exactly pick up and vanish. Even if you could, Travis set the knife down, money doesn't fix everything. But it makes things easier. He turned to face her. Does it? She didn't answer right away. It gives you choices. I didn't realize that until I didn't have any. You had choices. You walked out. I ran, she corrected. There's a difference. He studied her. What happens when they come looking for you? They won't, she said quickly. There's a PR team cleaning up the mess. I made sure of it. You think money can bury everything? No, she said quietly, but it can buy silence. He went back to chopping, the rhythm steady, final. That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep clutching a stuffed rabbit Noelle had found in an old storage box, Travis leaned against the railing outside. Noelle stepped up beside him, the air cool against her skin. She asked me if I wanted to come to her school play, Noelle said. Travis raised a brow. Did you say yes? I did, but I wasn't sure if it was okay. He rubbed a hand across his chin. She doesn't ask people unless she means it. I noticed. A pause settled between them, filled only by the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of a neighbor's tractor. Why me? Travis asked finally. Out of all the porches you could have stopped at, why this one? She hesitated, then said, Your light was on. That's not an answer. It was the only one that felt safe. He didn't say anything for a long time, then, I've been burned before, Noelle. Sophie too. I'm not here to burn anyone. You're not staying forever either, she looked down. I know. Her words hung there, fragile and true. The days turned into a quiet rhythm. Mornings with Sophie, afternoons helping around the house, evenings spent talking in low tones after bedtime. Noelle never touched her phone. never mentioned the life she'd left behind. But sometimes Travis caught her staring at nothing, expression far away. One evening, while they were fixing a loose board on the porch, Noelle accidentally drove the hammer into her thumb and let out a curse that made Travis glance up sharply. "I've heard worse," he said, kneeling beside her. She winced. "It's just bruised." He reached for her hand, inspecting the swelling. "You should ice it." "You really think I can't handle one bruise?" He looked at her. "Not the point. You don't have to handle everything alone." She held his gaze. "What if I don't know how to stop? Then maybe it's time to learn." She didn't pull her hand away. Later that week, Sophie came home with a flyer in her backpack. "Daddy, can Noelle come to the spring festival with us? There's games and music and a raffle and a cake walk." Travis opened his mouth, but Noelle beat him to it. "I'd love to," Sophie beamed. "Yay, you have to wear something fun. You can't wear all gray again." Noelle laughed. "I'll try." The festival was a blur of colors, laughter, and small-town charm. Sophie dragged them from booth to booth, cotton candy in one hand, Travis's hand in the other. Noelle trailed beside them, her hair down for the first time, catching the sunlight like honey. They played ring toss, watched a pie-eating contest, and lost spectacularly at the three-legged race. As the sun dipped low, casting everything in golden light, Travis glanced at Noelle, who was helping Sophie pick a prize from a ticket booth. Something in his chest shifted. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. Not about someone who didn't belong here. Not about someone who had an entire world waiting for her to return. But watching her laugh as Sophie handed her a plastic tiara, he couldn't help it. He was falling for her. And he wasn't sure what scared him more, the fact that he knew she'd leave, or the part of him that didn't want her to. Travis hadn't shaved in 2 days. He stared at himself in the mirror that Monday morning, razor in hand, wondering when he'd started caring what his face looked like before breakfast. Down the hall, Noelle's laugh floated through the open kitchen window, soft and easy, followed by the clang of a pan and Sophie's delighted squeal. He heard the back door creak open, then footsteps across the porch as Sophie called out to the chickens, naming each one with dramatic flair. He set the razor down and walked out into the kitchen just as Noelle was pouring pancake batter into the skillet. She glanced at him, mourning. "Hope you don't mind I found the blueberries in the freezer." He reached for a mug. "You figured out the stove faster than I did." "I've cooked for myself before," she said. "You know, once or twice." Under supervision. He sat down at the table, watching her flip the pancake with a confidence that hadn't been there the first week she arrived. "You're not the same person who knocked on my door." I was freezing, exhausted, and wearing shoes 3 sizes too small. She slid a plate in front of him. "I'd hope I've improved." Sophie burst through the door, holding a feather in one hand and a stick in the other. "That chicken tried to eat my hair again." "She probably thought it was straw," Noelle said, turning back to the stove. Sophie gasped. "Are you saying I look like a scarecrow?" "No," Travis said, grinning. "You look like a farmer who forgot their hat." Sophie narrowed her eyes, then giggled and climbed into her chair. Noelle sat across from Travis, her eyes flicking up to meet his. "I spoke to someone yesterday." "Yeah," he asked, cutting into the pancake. "An attorney I trust." "I told him I wouldn't be returning to the foundation, or to New York." Travis set his fork down. "You're serious?" "I've been working with him quietly since the day I left. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure." "And now you're sure," she nodded. "I've transferred control of my estate to a board of directors. I'll retain oversight, but they'll handle the day-to-day. I don't want that life anymore. And the press, they've already moved on to the next scandal. One of my cousins started dating a pop star." "That's kept the headlines busy." Travis leaned back in his chair. "So what does that mean for you?" "I'm not going back." She looked at Sophie. "If I stay, I want to find something meaningful to do here." Sophie blinked. "Like what?" "I don't know yet. Maybe help fix up the library. Or start an art program at school." Travis raised a brow. "You do that. I have the resources. And the time, I'd rather use it for something real." After breakfast, Travis drove Sophie to school while Noelle cleared the dishes. When he returned, she was in the garage, sitting on an overturned paint bucket, flipping through one of his old ledgers. "I didn't touch anything," she said as he stepped in. "But I noticed something." He grabbed a rag and wiped his hands. You going through my books now? I was looking for a screwdriver and found the log. Your supply costs have doubled since February. I know, the distributor changed ownership. There's a wholesaler outside of town. I have a contact. They could cut your spending in half. He crossed his arms. You planning on overhauling my whole business? No, but I thought you might want to stop bleeding money. He stared at her for a moment, then cracked a grin. All right, Hartley, let's hear your plan. They spent the afternoon reorganizing the garage and calling vendors. Noelle made notes, flagged invoices, and suggested a few new services Travis hadn't considered before. By evening, they were both covered in dust and grease, and Travis had to admit she knew what she was doing. Where'd you learn all this? He asked, leaning against the workbench. My father used to make me shadow every department in the company, said I couldn't run something I didn't understand. He handed her a bottle of water. Did you resent him for it? At the time, absolutely, but now? She took a sip. I wish I'd paid more attention. He looked at her, really looked. You want to stay here, really stay? I haven't felt this settled in years. Travis opened his mouth, but the sound of tires crunching on gravel cut him off. A sleek black car pulled up, gleaming like it had never touched a dirt road in its life. Noelle stiffened. The man who stepped out wore a tailored jacket and mirrored sunglasses. He looked around with marked disgust before his eyes landed on Noelle. Darling. She dropped the water bottle. Travis stepped forward instinctively. Who the hell are you? The man offered a tight smile. Elliot Langford, I'm here for my fiancée. She's not your fiancée, Travis said flatly. Legally, she is. We never finalized the papers. And unless she wants this to get messy, I don't, Noelle said quickly, stepping between them. Travis's jaw tensed. You want to go with him? No, she said, eyes locked on Elliot. But I need to deal with this. I'll wait. You don't have to. I'm not leaving. Elliot watched the exchange with a sneer. Touching. You always did like lost causes, Noelle. Travis's fists clenched, but Noelle placed a hand on his arm. Let me handle it. She stepped toward Elliot and spoke low enough that Travis couldn't hear, but her posture was steel. After several tense minutes, Elliot turned on his heel and walked back to the car, slamming the door hard enough to make the windows rattle. As the car sped away, Noelle turned back to Travis, her hands shaking slightly. He had a contract, she said. One of those disgusting prenup things designed to trap me, but I had it voided a week ago. I just hadn't told him yet. Travis exhaled. You all right? She nodded. I will be. He stepped closer. You didn't have to protect me. I wasn't protecting you. She looked up at him. I was protecting what I found here. The next morning, a letter arrived in the mailbox addressed to Miss Hartley. Inside was a single sheet of embossed paper. Noelle read it in silence, then handed it to Travis. It's official, she said. Everything's settled. He read the letter and folded it carefully. What now? I'm not going anywhere. He didn't say anything, just reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. And this time, she didn't let go. The rain had rolled in quietly overnight, soaking the fields and streaking the windows with soft rivulets. Travis stood at the kitchen sink, sleeves pushed up, drying a plate while glancing out across the mist-covered yard. Noelle was out there, standing barefoot under the awning, sipping from a chipped mug and watching the gray sky like it held answers. He set the plate aside and walked out, the screen door creaking as he joined her. She didn't turn. Last night was quiet, she said, voice low. Sophie slept through the storm, he replied. Noelle glanced at him. I didn't. He leaned beside her, shoulder brushing hers. Thinking about everything, she nodded once. I keep wondering if I'm allowed to feel this peaceful. Like I haven't earned it. You've earned it, he said without hesitation. She looked at him then, her expression open in a way it hadn't been before. I want to build something here, not just hide from what I left behind. He tilted his head. You got something in mind, she set the mug down slowly. The lot next to the school is empty. The old community center was condemned years ago. What if I rebuilt it, not flashy, just something real? Music, art, tutoring, a place kids can go after school. He studied her. That's a big project. I've already started talking to the town council. Quietly, they're interested. You'd stay through that, she held his eyes. Longer. Travis felt something shift in his chest again, deeper this time. Not the first flicker of desire or the rush of early affection, but something stronger, something anchoring. "Do you want this life?" he asked. "Not just the quiet days, but everything that comes with it, the early mornings, the busted plumbing, the secondhand furniture, the PTA meetings. I want all of it," she said, no hesitation. "I want grocery lists and field trips and muddy shoes and Sunday dinners. I want Sophie's terrible knock-knock jokes. I want you." He stepped forward, lifting her hand, brushing her knuckles with his thumb. "I should have told you weeks ago. I've fallen in love with you, Noelle," her breath caught, eyes shining. "I love you too." Before he could speak, the screen door banged open and Sophie ran out, jacket half zipped and boots on the wrong feet. "We're gonna be late," she called, spinning once in the wet grass. "The play starts in like now," Travis chuckled. "Go grab your backpack." "We're coming." Sophie darted back inside, her braid flying behind her. Noelle turned to Travis. "You don't have to say yes to any of this. You didn't ask for me to show up here." "I didn't ask for it," he said, lacing his fingers through hers. "But I'd be a fool to let it go." They dropped Sophie off at school just as the first bell rang, then joined the rest of the parents filtering into the auditorium. The stage was covered in hand-painted cardboard trees, and a faded curtain hung lopsided above the set. Noelle squeezed into the small fold-down seat beside Travis, her knees brushing his, her hand warm in his lap, when the lights dimmed. Sophie appeared on stage in a floppy bunny costume, proudly delivering her line with theatrical flair. Travis felt Noelle's shoulders shake beside him as she tried not to laugh. Afterward, parents and kids flooded the hallway, clutching juice boxes and cookies. Sophie rushed into their arms. "Did you see me?" she asked, eyes wide. "You were the best bunny I've ever seen," Noelle said, crouching to her level. "Are you coming to the class picnic next week? If your dad lets me." Travis knelt beside them. "She'll be there." Sophie threw her arms around both their necks. "Coolest family ever." That night, Travis found Noelle in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the rug, sorting through a stack of old board games Sophie had pulled from the closet. He sat beside her. "You really want to stay? I've already started moving my things into the guest room." He narrowed his eyes playfully. "You know that room's not big enough for your shampoo collection. I was thinking we could make room in yours." He didn't answer. Just reached out and pulled her into his arms, kissing her like the final page of a book he never wanted to end. 2 months later, the new community center opened with a modest ribbon cutting and a crowd of neighbors who brought homemade pies and folding chairs. Noelle stood beside a banner that read, "The Hartley Center for Arts and Learning," but there were no reporters, no publicists, no flashes, just kids painting on easels and playing music in the corner while parents mingled. Travis stood with his arm around her waist, watching Sophie lead a group of second graders through a dance routine she'd choreographed herself. "You did this," he said. "We did this," she corrected. As the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting golden light across the lawn, Travis turned to Noelle. "I know we didn't do things the usual way, but I want to make this official," she blinked. "What do you mean?" He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. No crowd, no stage. Just them? The ring was simple vintage with a delicate gold band and a single oval diamond. "Marry me," he said. "Not because of what we've been through, but because of what I want us to build." She stared at him, stunned. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." They didn't kiss like in the movies. They just held each other, hearts steady, breathing in sync, arms locked around the promise that had started on a rainy porch and grown into something neither of them had planned. The wedding happened quietly 3 weeks later, beneath the oak tree in the backyard. Sophie wore a flower crown and insisted on reading a poem she'd written entirely in rhymes. Neighbors brought casseroles and folding chairs, and someone strung fairy lights through the branches. Travis wore his best shirt. Noelle wore a soft off-white dress that fluttered in the breeze. When she walked toward him, Sophie held her hand and everyone stood. They said their vows with the wind in their hair and the sun on their faces. No photographers, no headlines, just truth. Afterward, they danced in the grass while Sophie twirled between them, shrieking with delight. And when Travis pulled Noelle close, his voice low against her ear, he said, "You turned my quiet life upside down." She smiled against his chest. "You gave mine meaning." They didn't need palaces or private jets. They had a girl with wild curls, a house full of laughter, and a love that had grown not from wealth or convenience but from choosing each other every day without hesitation, and that was everything. Travis stood at the edge of the field behind their house, his hands shoved in the pockets of his jacket as he watched Sophie race across the grass toward Noelle, who was setting up a collapsible easel near the fence line. The golden hour light spilled across the landscape, catching the soft curve of Noelle's smile as she bent to help Sophie uncap a jar of paint. It had been nearly 6 weeks since their wedding, and life had settled into a rhythm that felt both surreal and deeply real. The kind of life he hadn't dared to imagine for himself again, not after everything. But here it was morning coffee with a woman who knew how he liked it without asking, school drop-offs that ended with 3-way hugs, and evenings filled with the smell of dinner and the sound of laughter that echoed through every room of the house. He glanced toward the driveway as a dusty SUV pulled in, and his brother Wyatt stepped out, holding a clipboard and looking around with raised brows. "You sure this is the right place?" Wyatt called as he approached. "I thought you said she was building a center, not a whole movement," Travis chuckled. "You're looking at the early stages of it. Give it a year, she'll have the whole state wrapped around her finger." Wyatt stepped onto the porch and handed him the clipboard. "The contractor's ready to break ground on the expansion. She wanted me to get your signature too." Travis scanned the papers. "She's been pulling late nights planning this." Wyatt leaned against the railing. "You okay with all that?" "Her diving into something this big, she's not doing it for herself," Travis said. "She's doing it for the kids, the town, and because she finally wants to build something that's hers, not just inherited." Wyatt looked out toward the field. "Never thought you'd end up with someone like her." "No offense, none taken. I didn't either. Guess that's how you know it's real." Travis glanced back at Noelle, who now had a streak of blue paint across her cheek as Sophie tried to explain what was supposed to be a horse but looked more like a dragon. "Yeah. It's real." Inside, the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and something richer. Travis found Noelle at the counter later that evening, stirring batter with one hand while balancing Sophie on her hip. "You know," he said, leaning in to kiss her temple, "we could have just bought muffins." Noelle glanced at him without pausing. "You promised Sophie we'd bake for the fundraiser. You're not bailing now. She's got flour in her hair. She's also learning fractions. Win-win." Sophie beamed. "1/4 is smaller than 1/2. We're raising a genius," Noelle said, setting her down gently. "Go wash your hands, sweetie." As Sophie rushed off, Travis wrapped his arms around Noelle's waist from behind. "You tired?" he asked. "A little," she admitted, resting her back against his chest. "But it's a good kind of tired. You've been up late working on those building permits." She turned in his arms. "I want this to be perfect, not polished or flashy, just something this town can actually use." "I know. And you're doing it right. You've got the whole council eating out of your hand." "I bribed them with banana bread." He laughed softly. "You're terrifying. You love it." He didn't deny it. Instead, he kissed her slowly, sweetly, with the kind of certainty that only came from knowing you were exactly where you were meant to be. That weekend, they hosted a small dinner at the house, just close friends, neighbors, and a few of the teachers from Sophie's school. Noelle moved through the crowd with ease, her laughter warm, her eyes always scanning for Sophie, who was busy showing her classmates the chickens out back. Later, as the last car drove away and the house settled into quiet, Noelle curled up on the couch beside Travis, her bare feet tucked under a blanket, a glass of wine in one hand. "I've been thinking," she said, staring into the flickering light of the fireplace. "Dangerous." She nudged him. "I want to start something else, not another building, something smaller, a scholarship fund, for girls who don't have the chances I had, not just college trade schools, apprenticeships, local opportunities." He looked at her, pride rising in his chest. "You don't stop, do you?" "I don't want to. Not when I have the resources to make a difference, but I don't want it to feel like charity either. I want it to feel like hope. You're going to be a force in this town. I just want to be useful. You already are." She turned her head toward him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't knocked on your door that night?" "No," he said, "because I can't imagine anything else now." She kissed him, slow and lingering, her fingers threading into his hair. "Me neither." A month later, the Hartley Center's expansion broke ground. Sophie cut the ribbon herself while wearing a construction helmet 3 sizes too big. Noelle stood beside her, one hand resting on her small shoulder, the other holding Travis's. They were featured in the local paper, Noelle in jeans and boots, Travis with a paint roller in one hand and Sophie grinning between them. The article called them the heart behind the Hartley Center, and for once, the name felt like it belonged to her because she'd earned it. In early spring, their farmhouse buzzed with preparations for the town's first art showcase. Sophie had 3 paintings on display, including one titled "Our Chicken Looks Like a Dinosaur," which stole the show. The night before the event, Travis walked into the bedroom to find Noelle sitting cross-legged on the bed, surrounded by papers and sketches. "Still planning?" he asked. "Just finalizing the student program for summer. I want to include music, not just visual art." He leaned against the doorframe. "I've never met anyone who believes in people the way you do." "I believe in second chances," she said, looking up at him. "I got one. I want everyone else to know they deserve one too." He crossed the room, pulled her up gently, and kissed her until the papers fluttered to the floor. That summer, the town didn't just see the center as Noelle's project. It became part of the community. Kids gathered there after school, adults volunteered to teach or mentor, and even Sophie gave impromptu dance lessons to anyone willing to listen. On a warm June evening, after the last student had gone home and the lights dimmed across the yard, Noelle and Travis sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies blink across the field. "I always thought love had to be complicated," she said. "Big, dramatic, messy." "It was," he said. "Until it wasn't," she leaned into him. "This is the forever I never knew I needed." He kissed her hair, his voice quiet. "It's ours, all of it." Sophie appeared moments later, dragging a blanket behind her, eyes heavy with sleep. "Can I stay out here?" she mumbled. Travis lifted her into his lap, and Noelle wrapped the blanket around all 3 of them, under the stars, with the scent of honeysuckle in the air and the sound of cicadas humming softly in the distance. They sat in silence. Noelle rested her head on Travis's shoulder as Sophie drifted off between them. It wasn't a palace or a jet-set life. It was better. It was theirs. And it was home.